conflict resulting from an overload of AP classes had a different lunch hour, with the plans. Liz, Julia, Kenny. That was the way things were, and no one questioned it anymore. After school, Liz drove home with the radio blasting. She was more lenient on the gas pedal than usual, because she knew she would return to an empty house. Her mom was either in Ohio or Bulgaria that weekend. She couldn't remember. It didn't matter. There was always a business trip, and always another one. Once upon a time, Liz had loved that her mother traveled. It was like magic, like a fairy tale to have a mother who crossed oceans and knew the sky. Besides, when her mom wasn't home, her dad let her eat on the couch, and he never nagged when we wanted to jump on the bed or skip brushing our teeth or play on the roof. But then her dad died, and she grew up, and her mother still went on her trips, and Liz had learned to be lonely. It wasn't the aloneness that Liz minded. It was the silence. It echoed. It bounced off the walls of the Emersons' oversized house. It filled the corners and the closets and the shadows. In reality, Liz's mom wasn't gone as often as it seemed to Liz, but the silence magnified everything. It was her oldest fear, that silence. She had always hated when there was nothing to say, hated the minutes of darkness at sleepovers as everyone drifted but didn't quite sleep, hated study hall, hated pauses in phone calls. Other little girls feared the dark, and they grew up and left their fears behind. Liz was afraid of silence, and she kept her fears clenched so tightly in her fists that they grew and swallowed her whole. For a while, she sat in the garage with the Mercedes still purring beneath her, the radio blasting line after line of rap she could barely understand. She wished that she'd asked Julia or Kenny to come over after school so she could put off the silence for a little longer. But she hadn't, and she told herself that regret was stupid, and she pulled her keys from the ignition. The silence hit her physically, surrounded her as she unlocked the back door, swallowed her as she went inside, strangled her as she slid out of her shoes and microwaved something called a pizzerito, a melting pot of flavor. Briefly, she thought about going for a run. Open gym for soccer would start soon, and she was out of shape. But though the air was crisp and part of her wanted that escape through movement, a greater part was unwilling to go upstairs for her running shoes, come all the way back down, lace them up, dig her keys back out of her purse, lock the door. The microwave beeped, and Liz fetched the pizzerito and flipped through channels until the boredom became intolerable. Then, with the silence still pounding inside and outside of her, Liz went to the bathroom, slid her fingers down her throat, and carefully transferred the melting pot of flavor from her stomach to the toilet. In her life, Liz had flirted with a number of dangerous things: drugs, bulimia, the pervert stoner who worked at Radio Shack. Bulimia was the only one that stuck. She had broken the habit for a while. She'd started puking blood for a bit, which frightened her because she hadn't wanted to die. Not then. But she was going to be grinding in a swimsuit tonight, and she wanted to be happy. She wanted to be bright and laughing and thin. She flushed the pizzerito and brushed her teeth, but the taste was still there, so she went down to the basement and dug through her mother's enormous wine cabinet and swiped a skinny bottle of— Actually, she wasn't really sure what it was because the words weren't in English, but it was alcoholic and smelled like berries, and the label was pretty, and uncorked it on her way back upstairs. She drank it in bursts, quick, head-thrown-back shots, as she went to her room and opened her closet to consider her collection of swimsuits. The yellow, frilly bikini made her look like a daffodil in the worst way. The red one was a bit too slutty, even for her, and the white bottoms had faded and stretched so much that they now vaguely resembled granny panties. Liz finally settled on the striped maroonish one she'd found on sale at Victoria's Secret a few months before, and she was scrutinizing her hips in the mirror when she caught sight of her fat, bald, hairy, generally pedophilic neighbor standing on his lawn in his bathrobe, squinting at her window. Liz flipped him off and went back down the hall.
Sometimes